container gardening
Oh, yeah.
or these raised beds, you've got to fill it with something. I do a lot of container gardening. So should I mix my topsoil from my land with the gardening soil to put in the containers? Because I've got lots of
Now you're
different
talking
size pots. Yeah.
Okay, you're talking about pots.
And right now I just have straight garden soil I've bought. Should I be mixing that with my own topsoil?
It's probably inconvenient, but yes, you would get better results
Okay.
if you did that.
That's good to know.
Now then you have to ask yourself what you're going to do with the holes that you've dug
Yeah.
in your yard. But you can buy good topsoil. You just
Okay.
have to be a topsoil judge and look at it. So,
Well, okay, so that begs one more last question that I have. The difference between vermiculite and perlite and how much you need. So you've heard of Happy Frog soil. It's a crazy
brand.
expensive. Yeah, they're crazy expensive.
I've not heard that, but
Well, Douglas County Co-op used to have it, but it was $350 a truckload versus $50.
Mm.
But then you put back guano and mycorrhiza, but it's got a lot of perlite in it. That comes from, I guess, volcanoes somehow, and it allows water flow. But I guess the vermiculite holds water. I mean, do you need these?
no. Okay, so what you're talking about are inorganic soil additives. Remember when we talked about soil, we had organic matter, which is compost, leaves, grass clipping, and that. Then we have inorganic matter, the two that you mentioned, vermiculite, which is a byproduct of the mining industry. I grew up for a few years in South Dakota, but mining was a big industry there, and they used to mine a product called mica, which
Yeah.
it split off into very thin
And that's like the
sheets.
shiny rock, right? It's got, like,
Exactly,
sparkles.
exactly. Well, the byproduct of that turns out to be vermiculite, which is basically ground up mica. It
Huh.
wasn't big enough to actually sell as a finished product, but it's a good ground additive. Perlite, as far as I know, is a manufactured process, but both of those items are inorganic, and the only thing they do is allow pore space in your soil. We talk about clay being heavy soils, heavy meaning dense. Well, you add more perlite and vermiculite, and it loosens that up. It creates space for water and air, which is basically what they do.
Good drainage.
So you
Drainage.
get your soil analyzed if you're way too much into the clay. And I have one spot that doesn't drain. You know, they tell you to dig a hole and put some water in it,
Yep.
and it just sits there. It doesn't drain. So that kind of an area, either because of the hill coming down or whatever. But point is, if you had too much clay, you would want to put something in there to help the water drain out.
Are you gonna plant something in it?
Not that area. It's like, well, because there's a hill coming down and it kind of collects water there. So probably not that spot.
Okay.
But I'm saying if you had super heavy clay soil, you would want to amend with something to allow those air pockets, is what you're saying.
That's
if it was
correct.
too much in the clay side. Okay.
Now, for the example that you gave, that creates a perfect catch basin that you can fill with rock and or water-loving plants, and it creates a space that water can collect and seep slowly down into the soil.
See, nobody ever
Which is a
talks
good
about
thing.
water collecting plants. Like
Well,
you almost never see people talk about plants that do well in water with wet feed basins.
that's
right?
true, but they're there.
Like
All
willow.
right,
Willow's
that'll be
a
for
good
part 2. You guys are missing
Okay,
out.
That makes sense.
Okay, well, unless there are any more questions, Don, do you want to talk a little bit about perennials and dahlias?
Where are those beautiful flowers?
Example of some flowers that grow from what we usually call bulbs. So, do you have any flowers or plants that have come from bulbs?
We tried, but
Okay.
it
What
didn't
kind?
work. They were tulips, and then something
Tulips?
ate them. Probably, but that's where we got
Okay.
our deer fence up. So
Right,
maybe they love
right,
them.
okay. So there are like 5 different plant structures that we usually refer to as bulbs, okay? So we have rhizomes, tuberous roots, true bulbs, tubers, and corms.
All right, so this should be a test.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Pop quiz.
Rhizome would be something like ginger.
very good.
Right.
Okay, so a rhizome,
Hops, right?
here's an example of.
But I don't know what a corm is, so I'm out.
Okay, so a rhizome, an iris is a
Oh,
perfect
yeah.
example, and
Okay.
ginger. Okay.
Iris is a rhizome. I did not know
Yeah,
that.
they are. Bleeding hearts, which I have made the mistake of putting in 2 of my flower beds. The native bleeding heart, the pale lavender one. About this time of year, I pull it out. I just pull it out by the handfuls because it gets into all of my plants. And when I pull it, the roots just come up with it. They go everywhere.
So she has the opposite problem of Dawn and myself. I can't get stuff to grow. She has so many, she has to pull them out.
Yeah. I mean, I
Okay.
love them, but if I knew now, then what I know now, I would have planted them out under some trees somewhere on the edge of the property where they could just do their happy
Yeah.
thing.
Okay, so
you know?
those are rhizomes.
Right.
So that's growing under
Right.
the ground
So,
and spreading.
yeah, it's a thickened stem that grows partially or entirely under the ground. And irises, if you think of irises, if you've ever been in an iris bed and you look down on the ground, sometimes you see them emerging. You see these really rough looking, so that's normal for them. They don't always appear like that. But
Don, if I can add one
You
little
bet.
thing here. I have a lot of irises on my house, on my place, and it took me years to learn that if you cover the rhizome completely, your rhizome will not bloom. So
Oh.
when you plant your rhizomes, make sure, don't cover them up with mulch on the way because they have to see the light.
Okay.
it's so interesting. Each one of these different structures, like bulbs, they have their own likes and dislikes, like that. It's very, very interesting. They're summer blooming, not winter hardy. So when I say that, it's in our climate, they will survive in the winter, usually, especially if you mulch well. But typically, unlike a daffodil that you plant in the fall and they withstand all the cold weather and they bloom early in the spring, irises are not like that. You usually plant them in the spring once the soil has warmed up. So if you want to continue their growth without digging them up and saving them
so they
and
are
replanting them,
perennials.
right? These are perennials. Yeah.
And so you're gonna get on the bulbs, so I'm not gonna
Mhm.
jump the gun here, but we bought some bulbs in the spring, which supposedly somebody kept in the fridge for us, and none of them worked. But these don't require a cold period.
Okay,
Like
so
a bulb would?
these actually are they're summer blooming, they're not winter hardy. So what that means is you can store them in a cool area, but you want to plant them when the soil warms up.
And that would be 65 degrees or just, what do you?
About 55.
55?
I think, usually.
Who, and the person who gave you these put them in the refrigerator. All I've ever heard about storing any of these structures has been keep them dry, usually bury them in sawdust. If you're gonna dig them up in the
I'll just
fall.
say, never buy from itulip.com. I'm not joking, the worst customer service and everything failed.
I'm giving some general information, but when it comes to each of these different types, there's so many specific types. Some you plant in the spring, some you plant in the fall. The little ones, like on corms, if they're little, You don't want to mulch over them
Wait,
because
so
they're
is
not
a
going to come
corm
back.
similar to a rhizome?
Yeah, and we'll talk about
Okay,
corms in a
got it.
minute. Yeah. So anyway, with the irises, what I've kind of chose to talk about today is you can plant them from July to October. You can
October.
Okay, in full sun or afternoon shade. All bulbs love full sun, except I have found from personal experience that they do better with morning sun and afternoon shade. My dahlias
Okay.
are all in afternoon sun.
Okay, so you're saying you
So-
can plant them up till October, but you said they are or are not winter hardy.
They are summer blooming, not winter hardy. So
So
They-
will
it
they?
depends on the climate.
They should be, if I can interrupt,
Yep.
they should be winter hardy. Now, there's a big contention between folks who are really religious about some of these. Some of them say dig them in the fall, replant them in the spring.
Got it. So
Wow.
you bring them in. That's what you're saying.
Right, keep them in a cardboard box.
Got it.
And
Sawdust.
for me,
I see what you're saying.
my experience, and I've grown daffodils, tulips, and irises, I leave them in the ground all year and they seem to do fine.
Right. Now, after about 3 to 4 years or 3 to 5 years, if you notice that the blooms start getting small and they don't look like they're doing as well, that's the time to dig them up and divide them, and to replant them. Because
So
they,
divide them so you can actually break that rhizome and create two plants.
yes, you can. You need to let it heal a day before you replant it on those.
Okay. Wow.
Because most of these things create little bulbets. If you look, I know driving from Flournoy Valley, just after you go through Melrose, there is a bed of daffodils that's been there for the whole 47 years
Holy cow.
that I've lived here, and it comes back every year, but they are not quite as big and quite as beautiful, but there are more of them.
Okay.
So like a lot of things, if you divide them and give them a little more room, they will thrive
The bloom
rather
will be
than
bigger,
just
the
survive.
foliage
Yeah.
will be better.
So ginger is a rhizome.
Mm-hmm.
And I know they're doing a lot of wasabi, like you get on your sushi tray, the little green
Mhm.
pepper, that's being grown on the coast. It's supposed to do very well in
Yeah.
Oregon.
Good.
So yeah, okay.
Right.
So here, I have a question.
Okay.
With the bulbs and these type of plants we're talking about, is this like asexual reproduction? I could take the rhizome and replant it. It's not a seed.
Right.
Right.
You're right.
It spreads
It's
by rhizome.
asexual.
Okay,
It spreads by rhizome.
interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah. So the next one is my very favorite one. Is the dahlia. I'm just learning about 3 years into that. Okay. As a matter of fact, I have about 30 planted right now, and I'm experimenting.
Chris, pull up a picture of a dahlia, because I think I know what this flower looks like.
There's so many different varieties.
All
There's
right.
tiny little button dahlias, tiny little things, all the way to dinner plate.
Do you have any?
There's two yellow dahlias in the. Ones that I have right now, but I also have a really pretty purple one that is like single leaf with a little tiny. Yeah. They're so fun, They're just
Yeah.
they're actually a tuberous root. Okay, people a lot of times call them dahlia bulbs, and you can take one. And what's interesting about it is, when I first started the dahlias, I didn't realize that I had to look for an eye. Each root has an eye, and
Oh, yeah.
you need to plant.
Like a potato.
Yeah, it's really tiny though, and it's like a little acne, a little pimple.
I'm going to show Dawn this
Super
picture.
tiny.
So this is the root system of
Right,
a dahlia.
right. And you can plant
That's the
one.
root system of a dahlia.
You can plant one section of a root.
You
with
learn
an eye
something
on it,
every day. I had
and
no
in the
idea.
fall, you can harvest a whole clump. amazing.
So you
And
don't
you can
really
share
buy.
them.
So you don't buy dahlia seeds then.
No.
If you want to
No.
plant them. You
No.
buy these.
A piece of it's a tuberous root.
Got it.
So each of these are connected to a stem that grows out of the ground. And right about where the stem and this large part that provides nutrition meet, that's where you're going to find the little tiny eyes. And so when I first started this, I thought you just cut them up and throw them in a hole, you know.
Right.
I didn't look for eyes.
That's my level right now.
You know?
So.
Yeah.
I didn't look for eyes on them or anything, you know. And I wondered why nothing came up, you know. So
Don, if I could interject something,
bet.
kind of bring it home. Everybody knows what potatoes are,
Yeah.
and nobody ever planted potato seed, did they?
Right.
That's
a good
right.
point.
So
Yep.
we get those eyes on the potatoes, and we cut them up. And if you want to plant your own potatoes, you cut them up so that you have eyes on every piece.
Right.
Now the trick is you need to maybe dip it in a little sulfur to keep bugs, worms, and things from eating it up.
Oh, wow.
Take
That's-
notes. Take notes.
That's
Yeah,
the way you
do
plant potatoes.
And with dahlias, you can use cinnamon.
Really?
Yeah.
I like
So this fall,
You guys are getting so much for your money, and next time show up and maybe you can have some Barolo. I've got others.
oh yeah,
But they're drinking the best one I have right now.
So this past year, I had some dahlias, and unfortunately, we had an herbicide event at our house. And about when they got knee high, they got affected and they looked horrible, and you know. But this year, I experimented. I left half my bed of dahlias without digging them up, because that's another question that we're going to come to, is to dig up or not to dig up, you know. So you can usually get by with the first couple years leaving the bulbs, the tuberous roots in the ground, as long as you protect them somewhat from being too soggy. So I left half of mine in the ground, and they are huge this year. They came out of the ground just when they were supposed to. You know, we had kind of that funky spring where it got kind of cold
Yeah.
and got kind of warm and got kind of cold.
That was weird, yes.
So the other half of the dahlia bed I have are planted in the Discovery Garden way for master gardeners. You know, they were started from 1, 2 in a little bit of soil. Then they were planted with a stake. And all of those are much smaller than the ones that I left in the ground. So
Yeah.
there's benefits. Another thing is this year, a lot of gardeners are complaining that dahlias are having just kind of a rough year as far as growth goes. You know, and the other thing is fertilizing. So if you fertilize on a regular schedule, you know, once a month, you're going to have better luck. So the dahlias are summer blooming. Typically, like I said, I left mine in the ground, but I covered the bed with a sheet of plastic, black plastic, all the way except in the edge. I didn't want it to be completely dry under there, but I didn't want them to drown and rot. So,
So you love dahlias?
I do, because of the variety, and it's like a surprise.
Okay.
Especially, it's a surprise for me because I'm not, at this point, so scientific that I write the name of each dahlia on the stake. So I can't remember what I planted. I don't know if it's going to be purple or
I have no
yellow
idea
or
what our
big
plants
or
are,
small.
because the thing is, when you begin gardening, you think I'm going to remember all this, and you start upplanting stuff, forget about it. So I gave some friends in the wine industry, said, oh, here's a sun gold tomato, it's a nasturtium.
Oh no.
You're not 25 anymore,
Right.
Robert. That's the
It's
Well,
difference.
just
the
like,
thing
and they
is,
all look the
too-
same, and then you start like, oh, it's too small, it's upplanted, and then I'm kind of lazy about marking stuff, and it's kind of like, I'm at, you know, a couple weeks later, it's like, okay, I don't know what's what, so I learned a lesson.
Well, after
I
last
do like
year's
surprises though.
Right, yeah. After last year's experience, And I did get some dahlias last year. It's just that the plant was like a monster after that. What happened is my husband sprayed herbicide on the dandelions, but it was no wind, but it was a very hot morning.
He's gonna get beat up.
And it like,
There's no
there's a
doubt.
word for it. It's like vaporized.
Yeah, 80 degrees.
He uses an 80. Okay, so he uses an oil that kind of keeps even to keep the plant, keep the spray on the plant. Anyway, my poor little dahlias started looking like monsters. They grew, but they had really deformed limbs.
This
And,
guy's in big trouble, Leo.
well,
Yeah,
you
I think
know,
so.
it's all an experiment, right? You know, we learned a lot last
I
year
agree
about
with that.
We learned a lot, you know.
Which is
on-
the fun of gardening, by the way.
on the
Figuring it out.
on the inside, I'm like weeping. On the outside, I'm like, it's okay, you know. Next
worry,
year,
honey,
it's
I'm not
okay.
gonna
You
kill
do it
you
on
today.
purpose, you know.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, this year they're doing much better. And when you, another thing about dahlias that are different than other bulbs, you plant them long ways. You don't plant them up and down. So you lay them in the ground with the eye pointing up. Where a lot of the other bulbs, it has a very clear, or a lot of other bulb type structures have a very clear point on them, and a very clear root base. You know, so it's very obvious how you put them in the ground.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
Yeah.
If I may interject something here, a
Yes.
note of humor. In Fairbanks, if you die in the middle of winter, and the ground is too cold to dig, instead of burying you horizontally, they take a soil drill and just drill down and put you in, depending on how you've lived, either head first or feet first. And that's a joke.
That's
funny. So anyway, and the other thing I love about dahlias is, like last year my neighbor said, even though we had the herbicide incident, I had some really pretty purple ones. And he said, oh, I love that purple one. If you dig them up this year, can I get one? You know, so you can share. I mean, it's amazing of the number of the tuberous roots that it creates.
Well, and
And
so
you can share and trade.
the whole
It's
purpose
awesome.
of this club is to bring people together. So when they show up, they'll start to get benefits and knowledge. Now, we weren't going to put this on air, but they were nice enough to come up. I'm like, let's open this Barbaresco. We'd like to get you guys to the point where this group forms and you can share plants and information.
Absolutely.
Just saying.
Amen.
Like, you know, like next fall, if we're still doing this, I might bring
yeah.
a bag of bulbs.
If we're
There
still
we
doing
go.
this, they need your support, people. I don't want to keep beating you up, but come on. All right, so what do you
Okay.
got first next?
So another structure is actually the true bulb, and a perfect example of that is the daffodil. So the bulbs they're short underground stems of a solid, and they have a solid base plate, which you see, like if you were to look at a daffodil bulb, you see these little roots come out of the bottom, you know, that's called the base plate. And then the inside of it is actually where all of the leaves are going to come, and the nutrition. So they're a true bulb. So true bulbs include daffodils, hyacinths, tulips, lilies, and onions.
What about
Not a
garlic?
flower.
Is that a true bulb?
You know,
Because it doesn't look like
it
that
could-
one. It's got all these little.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think garlic is a bulb.
Garlic
Yes.
is a true
I think
bulb.
it is, yeah.
Because inside of the bulb is where the stem and the leaves grow from.
Yeah, if you've ever left garlic in your fridge too long. And
Yeah,
it
it'll
starts to
start to
leak
come out.
Oh, you bet.
Mhm.
But it's got almost like multiple bulbs in one.
Right?
Each
Like
clove can
Olivettes.
become a garlic, right?
Yes.
Isn't it amazing at how many plants come from bulbs, not seeds?
Well, and the funny part
It's
is, this is
amazing.
like, so spring, I'm like, let's go grow garlic, and then you find out, oh, they sell it in the
Wrong
fall.
time of
You need to
year.
put it in the fall. I'm like, I don't know any of this, right?
Right,
So
yeah,
I'm
every
learning
bulb
all the
is-
time.
Like, so for So daffodils are spring blooming, so they're winter hardy, all right? So you'll plant them in the fall in well-drained loose soil, about 5 inches down, and they need time to root before the frost hits. So on the daffodil and any other spring blooming winter hardy bulbs, you need to plant it in the fall.
So would you be planting your stuff in October, or what would you?
I don't have daffodils. I mean, there's a couple that have been in there forever. I just don't do anything with them.
Well, most
you
of the
know?
bulbs, like in Douglas County where we live, how?
September, October.
For
yes,
spring
good
blooming.
time.
For
Got
spring
it.
blooming, yeah. For summer blooming, you don't want to plant them until the soil warms up to 55 or 60 degrees.
I want spring. I need some. I
And
need.
there's no danger of frost.
You know,
Yeah.
after all that depression in the winter, I want some
Right.
color.
Right?
Right, so you need some bleeding hearts, some daffodils.
I don't know what. Pull up a bleeding heart. I don't know what a bleeding heart is.
There are different kinds.
You have some, I think, growing right out here along the sidewalk.
Man, I'm getting taken to school today, guys. This is great.
And with the true bulbs, you'll hear different people handle this different ways. After the foliage ripens or turns yellow, they're not especially attractive. Some people cut them right down, but really the proper way is to allow that foliage to remain until it's ready to fall off, because it provides nutrients to the bulb for the following year.
Oh, so you're saying once the flower doesn't look good anymore, you cut it, but let
Some
leave
people,
all
no,
the green.
some people cut it
But don't.
and they come back, but the proper way to do it, okay,
Okay.
is to leave those. And a lot of times, what's kind of attractive to make it look a little better in your garden is if you bend it over and then use one of the leaves or whatever to wrap it around. So you've probably seen that, It just looks a little more attractive in your
Here,
garden.
take a look at that.
Whoa,
So the bleeding hearts
Wow.
I have are
Wonder where it gets its name from.
that's amazing.
lavender. Mine are more like the native
Let me
ones.
see
There's
this.
multiple colors.
Purple colored?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, mine are native. So mine are just the lavender.
So with these, so we were researching bulbs, and some of these people buy them in the fall, put them in the refrigerator, and then they plant them. Would you recommend just putting them in the ground?
I would plant them in the ground if
Yeah.
I wanted to bloom them in the spring,
Yes.
right, Don?
Yes.
Yeah.
You're talking like this?
Yes.
Yeah,
see,
that's
now
That's
there's
the
a
one I'm
nice,
talking.
pretty.
That's the
That's
one
what
you
I
have
have.
growing out there.
And
It's
I
pretty.
gotta-
It
I gotta
comes
go
up
look
early.
now. Hold on. After the show, we're gonna go check this out. I don't even know what I have.
Let me tell you, it's pretty and it comes up early.
Yes, it
But
does.
let me tell you, when you start pulling it out, there's these tubers, these tuberous things, that you can just, if your soil is a little damp, you just keep pulling them and you come to a big cluster of them, and I just dig them up and they always come back.
The ones I have in my garden were spontaneous. I didn't plant them, they just grew there. And I've always protected them.
Well, I didn't plant that one outside either.
Yeah.
I don't know where it, well, but actually this building used to be,
Well-
the owner had a garden center here.
You
like
know-
a gift
Oh.
shop.
Birds are nature's planters. Birds like to eat a lot of seeds, and birds like to poop.
On your
And
car.
Wherever they poop, you can get a plant.
All right, so that sounds
If
good.
it's, spread like seeds, so.
All right, so now you're
Okay,
on which one?
So, another structure is actually called a tuber, and a good example of that is a begonia. So I used to have trouble telling a begonia from a geranium, and I finally
Chris, pull up
decided
begonia. I don't really couldn't tell you what it
begonias
looks like.
I have
have
no
big
idea.
leaves. Get it? Begonia B, big leaf B.
Okay.
All right,
Begonias
that's
have.
a good way to remember.
Show you what's in.
Oh, you have a begonia here?
Yeah. that's right.
Woohoo! All right.
Hey, isn't it?
No, I don't have
Oh,
any
I'm sorry.
begonias
Oh
here.
man,
Oh,
That is. an
I'm crushed
oleander.
now. But it's
That,
all right.
that little pink one, that's an oleander from my neighbors. That's
Oh,
the only
I'm
one I
sorry.
borrowed. That's okay. Yeah. So
Keeping you on your toes, Leo.
tubers, begonias come from tubers, and tubers are really odd little things. They almost look like a pile of poo.
Yeah, we'll